Good afternoon. It's Robert Phoenix and Jasper, and this is the Friday FARcast. Thank you for joining me today as we kick off today's shoe and just get into it. There's a lot to talk about, obviously. Let me just mute this. There we go. Jasper today was already here, like as I was getting everything together, lining everything up, getting ready to, program the show, press go, all that stuff. Pardon me, I got some cat stuff here. So anyway, he was ready to go. I'm wearing my green shirt today because I'm going to be talking about all things green and what we're witnessing right now on the global theater with Greta and this so-called green revolution. It has its roots, very deep roots, in other movements, other places, other times, and specifically certain portals, historical portals in history, one of which I'm going to talk about today. I'm also going to talk about a very influential work that was commissioned in the 1990s, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just get the lowdown on the date of this publication. I have to be very specific and clear about all my information, because when you are out here slinging it, you got to know what you're talking about, because people call you out on it if you're not. How is everybody today? It's a beautiful day. A beautiful day in the hill country. So one of the big pieces I'll be covering today is a work that was commissioned through Stanford, the Stanford Research Institute. And the work is called Changing Images of Man. It was published in 1982. And one of the publishers was, the publisher was Pergamon Press, which has publishing offices, or did, in Oxford, New York, Toronto, Sydney, Paris, and of course, Frankfurt. And we all know about the Frankfurt School, which we've talked about with Steve and Chris. And if you've ever been to Frankfurt, well, let's just say I've been to Frankfurt, and the feel of the city is just chilly. It's got a chilly vibe. And I went into the city center. They've got a huge city center with it's sort of like folky and Germanic, and it still didn't have that kind of warm or bright or folksy or homey feeling that I felt in other parts of Germany, which you can find, by the way. Cologne, or as they say, Köln, has a lot more of an organic, or at least it did when I was there, friendly, warm, folksy, personal vibe. It's a big city, and big cities have their stories, but it was very different than Frankfurt. And the Frankfurt airport it's just a maze to get through. But it's interesting that Pergamon Press has essentially publishing houses in Oxford, of course, Oxford being one of the intellectual centers of the planet, New York being one of the informational centers of the planet, and Toronto being connected to University of Toronto. And that's where we get into some of the behavioralist experiments, psychic driving. Psychic driving, and God, Jasper's just, I'm sorry. Just dumped a lot of his DNA on me. Anyway, we have psychic driving in Toronto and Sydney. I don't know about the sort of the deep sort of esoteric technological roots that are connected to Sydney. I'm sure if I spent some time, I could uncover them. And then, of course, Paris, where they had the Great Revolutions, the most recent one being 1968, and of course for the Yup Fest and their protests are still happening. So Pergamon Press, centrally located to distribute the materials. Yeah, Ontario, Sydney, France or Paris, and then Frankfurt. Okay, so we're going to get into this. We're going to get into Changing Images of Man. And we're going to talk about how this book or this tract, which you can find on the internet, it came across my attention in my screen probably around 2013, 2014. And when I read it, it blew my mind. It totally blew my mind because you can see where everything had kind of evolved as a result of this tract. It's almost like the Bible. It was almost like the playbook in the Bible for what we're experiencing now. So there are a number of other pieces that go along with this, but I'm going to focus a fair amount of today's show on this one treatise, a very long treatise, and I'll get into who the contributors were and what the contributions of those contributors, what they look like, and how they're actually kind of manifesting in the world today. Before we get into any of that, and of course, we're going to talk about Greta. Before we get into any of that, got a little bit of unfinished business. And I just want to bring up this individual, which we talked about on Sunday night. I'm going to bring him into the mix, just at least from the image side of things. And let me give you a show here. Okay, so there he is in his pre-CEO punkier days. Looks like his death metal days. Adam Neumann and his wife, who apparently is Gwyneth Paltrow's cousin through her father, Bruce Paltrow. And Bruce Paltrow was a big TV producer back in the 60s and 70s. He was one of the guys that produced Mannix, that show Mannix. So anyway, there he is. He was the CEO of WeWork. Well, he's not the CEO of WeWork anymore. We actually talked about that, and there was kind of a cutoff date, which was Tuesday, and that he was either going to step down or he was going to sort of run his own election to keep himself in power with WeWork. Well, he has stepped down. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that WeWork is out of the woods. WeWork still is on the hook for all these monstrous, and I mean monstrous, leases. Now, remember, they're the largest lessors of, they're the largest, they're not the leasehold, I guess they're the largest lessees, right? The largest lessees in New York, London, and Chicago. So that's a lot of real estate. And they're on the hook for a huge amount of leases in these cities. And so if for some reason or perchance that WeWork winds up running out of cash, which they were on their way to doing because of Adam Neumann's kind of reckless behavior and his business model, which was borrow from his stock portfolio to actually buy the physical buildings so you can lease them back to WeWork. That didn't actually manifest probably in the way that Adam Neumann thought he could manifest it as. So, because not everybody's going to sell the buildings. And that's a lot of buildings to buy. I think ultimately he thought, I'll create this shell company and kind of a shell business, and then I'll get a huge amount of pre-IPO stock offerings. I'll borrow against that. And I've got my good friend, or my good friends over at SoftBank, and they'll be able to front me money, and basically I'll be able to buy the majority, or at the very least, the kind of the largest buildings, the ones that have the most tenants, or the ones that have the most values in the cities that have the most value. I think that was his model, and ultimately become a corporate real estate demiurge. I think that was his model. Also, if there was a plan B, it would be a controlled demolition. Well, he's gone now. He's out of the picture. And the reason why he's out of the picture is because they wanted to put the brakes on their IPO, because the valuation of their IPO had drastically dropped because Wall Street was figuring out what their business model was. Now, the market is basically run by algorithms, but there are people that still invest in these businesses, believe it or not. And they didn't want their investments to go belly up unless, of course, they wanted to short the IPO, but that's not necessarily what you want to do. So WeWork is not out of the woods yet, but Adam Neumann is out of the picture. And so with that, I will take Adam Neumann and his lovely wife. I'll take her out of the picture as well, and they'll bring me back with my green shirt on. How's that? So we're going to get into a lot of this today. Got a lot of ground to cover. Of course, there's some other stuff going on. This thing with Trump and the impeachment and everything that's associated with that. We had Adam Schiff, and that guy, you know what I'm talking about? That Weasley little Democratic guy. Basically what he was doing is he was interpreting this thing with Ukraine and the whistleblower, and he was essentially, he wasn't reading the actual transcript. He was interpreting the transcript. So the guy's a fucking liar. I mean, he's a liar. Pardon me, he's a liar, but we know he's a liar. Most people in politics are liars. And even Trump has been known to lie on more than a few occasions. Sometimes, look, sometimes lying is an asset. I'll be honest with you. There's an asset. If you're playing poker, you better be a damn good liar. Because if you're not a good liar in poker, you're going to lose. And these are people that are playing high stakes poker, high stakes games. They're playing with big fake funny money. You know, on one level, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't exist. On another level, when they say it counts and say it exists, then it does. Isn't that the irony? It's just paper. It's all just kind of a subjective value. They print it up and they sell it back to us. So on some level for them, it's absolutely nothing. But for the attached value for others, well, it's the world. One of those interesting little paradoxes that we experience here on this planet. Anyway, but you've got to be a good liar to play poker, and they're playing high stakes poker. So in that venue, lying is actually an attribute, believe it or not. If you're truthful in poker, you will lose, unless you are using truth at various points in time to throw people off. That's a whole other discussion. So we've got this thing running in the background. I've heard that it is another version of a coup, that they're running another coup. They couldn't do it with Russiagate. They couldn't do it with Pornogate. They can't find anything that'll stick. I've been looking at the various points of view, and is Trump running this? Is this a Trump scheme, a Trump scam? Is this something that the Dems have put together as another kind of NSA, FBI, CIA, on the fly thing that maybe they've been working on for the past year? I mean, there's all kinds of scenarios. But the bottom line is it's a major fucking distraction. It is a big distraction. And again, we find ourselves in the midst of kind of another Latin American banana republic sort of coup moments. And Trump survived the first one. And most presidents don't. Reagan, there was a coup in the Reagan White House, and that's when he was shot. And, Do you think Reagan did the same thing after he was shot? Do you think he had the same policy? No, he didn't. Now, some people believe that Reagan was cloned after that, and that Jim Brady, with all those slugs in the head, how could he survive? Well, he was a clone too. I mean, there are some people that think that. I'm just throwing it out there. But it's clear that the Reagan policy, there was a pre-assassination attempt and a post-assassination attempt version of the Reagan doctrine. So did he survive the coup? Did he survive the coup ideologically? What about G.H.W. Bush? He was a 4-year president. Well, I guess you can count the 8 years of Reagan, so he might have been a 12-year president. And there was a very unusual kind of moment in time with G.H.W. Bush right around the Gulf War, where all of a sudden he started to look very different. His actions were very different. His body language was very different. There was a moment in Japan where he basically face planted into the chicken teriyaki or the Wagyu beef. I must have been having Wagyu beef. If they're in Japan, they're having the best marbled Wagyu beef. He just face planted. Like, again, there's a before and after moment with George Bush, and it's all around Gulf War I. If you go back and watch and look at it, there's a guy who's dynamic, electrified, and know he got his finger on the pulse of destiny. And he starts talking about the 1,000 points of light and the New World Order, and he's just spewing code, and he's on it. And then there's a guy after that, after a certain part of the Gulf War, who does not have the same kind of acumen, charisma, force, and drive. What about Bill Clinton? Did he survive his coup? No, he didn't. And there was a coup, took place inside the Clinton White House. It was called Whitewater. It was called Vince Foster. It was ultimately sort of dwindled down into the stupid Monica Lewinsky gate. He had a blue dress and some stains on the dress, and some laments and complaints from women that Bill Clinton had done some rather dastardly things to, against their will. And that's probably the case. Anyway, did he survive? Well, maybe physically he survived, but his presidency at a certain point became very, very different. He became, the United States was deployed and became a willing participant in the bombing and the shellings of Kosovo and what was going on in Bosnia. It was a really, really bad time, and a bad time to be alive in Central Europe, because they went in, they bombed the shit out of everything. Once those old relationships and the old tribalization kicked in and the groups kicked in, well, they got involved, and they started knocking the snot out of certain groups inside of Central America and Central Europe. And of course, when that happened, the infrastructure was destroyed. And who are you going to call? You're going to call Halliburton. They're going to come in. They're going to build it all back up again. So NATO was involved in that operation, and the United States committed troops to NATO, which was really kind of against our policy at that time. And we were for all intents and purposes fighting a war. It was a war that we didn't have to run by Congress and have it declared as such, but that's what happened. And Bill Clinton probably should have been tried for war crimes as a result of that. But he did that because he was compromised. And they said, look, you're going to go in, you're going to bomb the shit out of Kosovo, and you're going to put troops on the ground, and you're going to do what you're told. And he did it. He also had no-fly zones over Iraq. So like if you were somebody who wanted to bring supplies or food into Iraq, because there were sanctions against Iraq, there were no-fly zones. If you were a foreign country that wanted to do trade or bring something in over the airspace of Iraq, you get shot down, or you would get called off. So he was doing all these things, and it was because he was compromised. I would say he did not survive the coup. I mean, he did, but he was compromised. What about G.W. Bush? Once 9/11 happened, he was a puppet on strings. He would do whatever they told him to. He was going to do that anyway. So there was a coup that took place inside of that government as well. Inside of that regime, there was a coup that happened. And it was the neocons and the military industrial complex reasserting their power and their control over this government by essentially creating the Patriot Act, drumming it up, and then once 9/11 happened, everybody passed it because we needed all the security, and we've been in a world of shit ever since. Did he survive the coup? Of course, because he was part of the coup. There was a coup that took place during the Bush administration. What about the Obama administration? There was an absolute coup that took place, and it was a socialist, social Marxist coup, and he was the leader of it. And it didn't even happen inside, it was through the presidency. So the coup took place even before the president became president. And because he was doing the bidding of his New World Order masters, he didn't really have the same kind of crisis that these other presidents had to face. He didn't have to face any sorts of impeachment because he was on, I suppose, the left side, which would be the right side of the political equation. So the coup had already happened. The coup was the election and the re-election. And so now we have Trump, which for all intents and purposes, on the surface, looks like it was a counter coup. Now, some people would argue that Trump is nothing but a liar. And Trump is nothing but a dyed-in-the-wool Zionist neocon who wants to make Israel first. Some people assert that Trump is really a liberal in disguise who does the bidding of his daughter and his son-in-law, who will be more than happy to roll out 5G in every single city, town, and county across the country. Meanwhile, deploying the HARPA laws, which will be the national red flag law. So some people believe and see Trump as this person, and that he is not really the answer to the Obama coup. Well, I would say that that's a much more complex kind of generalization with Trump, because there are no easy answers and no easy gets with him, because there are times where he absolutely, on the surface, he absolutely looks like he is that person and doing those things, and to it he has. And there are other times where he hasn't and doesn't. And I think that ultimately what he will try to do is he will try to create a world or world-based power that is based on his version of what a global hegemony is. And his version of the global hegemony is a new world that is linked together through the idea of some kind of nationalism and sovereignty. And the underpinning of that would be essentially the model that Israel presents. Because Israel is a nationalist country. Israel has very defined borders. Israel has a very defined idea when it comes to pacts of aggression and intervention. And so that is the model. And that will be the model that he would like to trump and put forth. And even when he gets into stuff like LGBTQ, Trump is probably one of the most LGBTQ friendly presidents other than Obama. We know how friendly he was with that. But when you listen to Trump, he's always praising and lauding LGBTQ rights. And I don't understand how these LGBTQ people can sit there and call Trump hateful or a homophobe. If you really look at what he says, like when he was asked about Pete Buttigieg Mayor Pete, and how Mayor Pete was married, and he says it's great. He says that's progress. In his speech to the UN, he was just recently, which is a very interesting speech, he was praising LGBTQ values and equality. That guy, he's not lip servicing. That's because he was super close with Roy Cohn and Liberace. He knows from which he speaks. He'd be a hypocrite, right? He would be. No, he's back. I thought I got rid of him. He's back. What do you have to say? What do you have to say to the people of the world today, Jasper? What is your commentary on where modern man, or perhaps even better, modern cat is? Where's modern cat? Anyway, so Trump has been in the crosshairs of a coup, and it started even before he got elected. And to me, when people say, "Well, he was chosen, and he had the military behind him, and this is where things had to go because people were so fed up with Obama, and they needed this kind of vox populi figure." Yeah, I think that factors into it. But if you look at really sort of the evolution of events, they were working on essentially trying to trap him even before he became president. Now, maybe they knew that that's what was going to happen, that the fix was in. And I think Hillary Clinton knew about that as well, which when you look at the evolution of her events and her zombie presidency, about 2 or 3 days actually before the election, she decided to not have a party, canceled all the champagne. She knew that she was probably going to go down, and that was part of the deal. That's my sense. So they had time to kind of work on this thing. They had time to entrap Trump, which is exactly what this whole Russiagate and the dossier and all that bullshit was about. It was a coup, and they spent 2 years and millions of fake dollars, Federal Reserve currency, Federal Reserve notes, and they wasted everybody's time, and nothing happened. And then they got Bob Mueller up there, who was like your doddering granddad. Could you imagine Bob Mueller and Joe Biden having a couple of drinks together? By the third drink, they would have forgotten each other's name, and they'd need 2 or 3 other people there to help them remember who they are and interpret their history and their memories for them. I'd love to have that. It could be like a remake of My Dinner with Andre, but it would be with Joe Biden and Bob Mueller. What would be My Dinner with? What would it be? It would be I don't know. My morning prune juice with Joe. Right? It would be about him and Mueller. That would be a must-see TV. Anyway, Trump he basically survived that. I think he had to do certain things. I think he had to agree to certain things, especially around immigration. And now here he is again. It's coup number 2. And this is what's happening. We're watching it take place before our very eyes. And when things are being fired back and forth, we're watching a war take place. I mean, we're not seeing the rockets' red glare. We're not seeing the mortar shells and the salvos being fired across the Maginot line or the Mason-Dixon line, the party lines. But it's happening. We're watching a war go down right now, and it's not fun to watch. It is, for all intents and purposes, again, more ammo for demoralization. So, but this is where we are, and we're going to have to get through this thing, however this unfolds, however it unfolds. But that's where we are right now, and that's just on one screen. Okay, that's one screen. On another screen, we've got this financial crisis, which is going on with this thing called the repo and the Fed, and filling up these coffers where basically they're writing bad checks against money that's not there, but they keep getting money on these bad checks. It's kind of like if you go to, I think it's the Treasury bills. Isn't that what it is? Anyway, it's like if you keep writing checks to a check cashing service, they're going to front you money, and they're going to come back for that money in about 10 days and collecting that with interest. But you don't have it, but you keep writing the checks and they keep giving you the money. That's what's going on right now. And there's going to be potentially a huge liquidity issue, which is why, if you've been following the markets, and this is not necessarily my front and center domain, but I followed it a little bit. I try to make connections, especially on the astrological side with Uranus and Taurus, which is going to be a big ticket item with the money in the economy, obviously. But that's what's going on right now. There's a big liquidity problem. The big players have been liquidating their assets. Warren Buffett has liquidated a ton of his assets. Why? Because he wants money. He wants to be able to use that money. He wants to have money available. He doesn't want it tied up in all these different properties and all these different funds or whatever his cartel money is used to launder and buy, right? So that's what's going on. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. That's on another screen. Then on this other screen, we've got the environmentalists, we've got Greta Thunberg, another big deal. Because this is the program that is the insertion for the new paradigm. And that's what I want to get into today and sort of trace some of this stuff. But that's what we're dealing with right now. Isn't it fun? Isn't it really fun? We got a three-ring circus going on. We have turmoil, political turmoil, unending, unceasing political turmoil, at least at this point in time. We have a financial crisis through the repo market and liquidity that's bubbling, churning like a witch's cauldron. And then we've got the theater of the climate crisis. That's happening. Oh, in the meantime, where there's also a little thing called Iran. And maybe, just maybe, we might have another false flag. It is False Flag Friday. I haven't checked the news feed yet. But we could be dealing with another false flag relatively soon, which, of course, will get the anti-gun people banging their drum. And boy, isn't it fun. Look, at some point in time, you just have to sit back and say, holy shit, and just laugh at this stuff. Like what else? What else are we going to throw into the mix? Oh, how about some cannibalism as the new diet? And how about that? We'll throw that in there as well. Fun times. But this is it, okay? I'm just telling you, we're at the end of an age. We are at the end of an age. Technically speaking, we're probably at the end of the West and the Western hegemony as we know it, because this new model is trying to assemble itself. And it is a global model. And it's either going to be a global model where it's a world without borders and everybody just gets to run around like, I don't know, playtime in kindergarten and get free shit and naps and have electric cars and robots, drive them everywhere and make them smoothies while they're being driven everywhere. You know, I mean, this is one version of it. The other version is a world with borders, but it's a world based on this kind of nationalist model with all these agreements that are in place with the various countries, which are the trade agreements. And we already have NAFTA, and Trump is renegotiating NAFTA as we speak. He wants to make it better for Americans or better for the United States. Oh, guess who's working on that? Jared Kushner. How's that going to go? Maybe he'll tie immigration into this thing. Maybe that's how they'll attack them. I don't know, but that's how they're going to do this. That's how the new globalism will exist. Now, Trump shot down the TTP or the TTIP. He shot it down, and the reason he shot it down was because, in his estimation, it was a bad deal. Now, a bad deal doesn't mean no deal to Trump. It means that he would probably revisit that deal, but it would be the deal in his terms. So in globalism 1.0, if you look at it, let's look at this globalism 1.0 with the environmental lens. So in globalism 1.0, all the countries through the environmental lens are basically the same. like they have the same pull, same power, and they're subjected to theoretically the same environmental rules, laws, and dictates, which means that the United States is at a parallel, horizontal, equal level with a country like Lesotho or a country like, I don't know, is Chad still around? How about Liberia? The United States and Liberia are equal in that model. They are. That's how that works. In globalism 2.0, we have trade agreements and we're linked, but in that version, the United States is the leader of a new global order that is sovereign, but linked through international trade agreements. It's kind of like when Trump says, oh, I'm a globalist and I'm a nationalist. He said that. Why does he say that? Because he is both. He does believe in global trade. You bet your ass he does. But he only believes in global trade if the United States is in the center of it and determining the rules of engagement and determining how that or how those agreements unfold. And then once that is essentially drawn up, then we have a new version of globalism that is based on this idea of sovereignty with a network or an assemblage of treaties and trade agreements that are in place. I believe that is what Trump and what Steve Bannon both believe in and are working on in their own way, so that the nationalist model is intact, but has a globalist network and a globalist agenda. That's why he and Mike Pompeo talk about the new liberal order. It's their version. So this is what they're coming up with versus this other version where everybody is kind of at this same level, maybe the more social Marxist level. Some new paradigm is going to insert itself. And there could even be a third where neither of those two actually work, in which case we're in a very, very different territory. And that could be both equally liberating and terrifying at the same time, because then any kind of rule of law would be out the window. And then you'd have to determine how you're going to get through a world based on that, right? Those are potentially the three alternatives. There's two versions of order, and then the third version where there's complete and utter disorder. And that could actually be part of it, with maybe one of the other two versions being ready to be inserted after a degree of disorder. We're at a really crazy time, and it's happened so quickly, so quickly. It took us essentially 2 years to get here. 2 years. I mean, if you look at what was going on with Obama, I mean, Obama was not great. He basically, the Obama administration was a tinderbox and just completely ruined racial and cultural relations and set a lot of the social Marxist stuff into play. And then, what was it? There was this propaganda act that Obama, somebody in the chat will come up with it, that Obama rubber stamped, basically saying that you can pretty much lie with the news. But it was it's not FISA. It's a you guys will figure it out. So a lot of that stuff was being cooked underneath the surface. It was happening. It was happening, but not nearly with the acceleration that we're seeing now over the last 2 years. Just light speed stuff, absolutely light speed stuff. Okay, before I get into sort of the main, the meat of today's show, I wanted to just bring up a little story, and let me see if I can find it. This is kind of indicative of the times that we're living in. Okay, here we go. Let's find this thing real fast. I saw this today. This story caught my eye today. Okay. Trump calls for Schiff to resign. Pelosi says, did you see that Nancy Pelosi left the impeachment documents on the airplane she was traveling on? Did you see that? My God. Let me find this story. That just about says it all right there. Give me 1 second. Let's go. Do a little keyword search here for the story. Okay. Here we go. So this is a canary in the coal mine kind of moment right here. Where'd it go? Here it is. Okay, this is a canary in the coal mine kind of moment. So this is from the SF Gate, which is sort of the web portal of the San Francisco Chronicle. And so I actually used to go to this place every now and then. I used to work in Redwood City back in the good old my Silicon Valley days. And the Woodside Deli was your typical kind of great Italian deli. The mainstay had been there for 60 years. 60 years. And it's closing now. And Redwood City used to be just a sleepy little town. And then it became an internal organ of Silicon Valley. I'm not sure what. Maybe the colon. I don't know. Anyway, let me read this. Woodside Deli was known for their classic deli subs, specialty meats, an assortment of imported Italian goods that offered customers around Redwood City. But after 60 years in business, the deli announced its plans to shutter. The announcement was made on Facebook with a letter from owner Kyle Vogel, who took ownership of Woodside Deli in 2017 and stated that their lease would end on September 30, but they would continue to sell sandwiches and remaining store items through October. So Woodside Deli's impending closure comes nearly after a year after reopened for business. So these guys took 9 months and they renovated the deli. Between January to October 2018, the building temporarily closed to address structural issues and bring it up to code. New plumbing, wiring, kitchen flooring were added, among other improvements, but they stayed true to their old school feel. It's brand new and same old, he told the Almanac at the time of the reopening in October 2018. But now the deli will close for good as a result of 3 looming issues that included a 52% rent hike. So the guy goes in, makes all these repairs, says, we're in it to win it. We're in it for the long haul. People love the old school deli sandwiches, the imported Italian goods. Landlord jacks up the rent by 52%. Now we have the rising cost. Well, let me just hold on a second. That's usurious. It's like, well, gee, yeah, thanks for putting in all those great new fixtures and taking care of the plumbing and basically resetting the foundation. Redwood City is right near the San Andreas Fault. It's on the fault line. So of course there's seismic activity. Buildings have to be replumbed and stabilized, new foundation, all that stuff. So he goes and does that. Now the owner says, thanks a lot. We're gonna jack your rent up by 52%. Now guess what? The rising cost of healthcare for full-time employees. That's Obamacare, by the way. It's not Trump care. That's Obamacare. So back in the old days, right? If you were a full-time employee and you had something go wrong with you, healthcare was not that expensive. It just was. If you had to go to the doctor, it wasn't that expensive. You could even go out of pocket. Doctors weren't that expensive. And it became an industry, and now it's become an institution. So he can't afford the healthcare, can't afford to pay his employees, and the lack of finding new talent. You know what that means? It means that people are just not willing to work. And I've seen this time and time again with small businesses. People aren't interested in working or having what they would call shit jobs for many reasons. Number one, they don't pay. They can't pay enough. And when you institute a $15 an hour wage or a $20 an hour wage, which is what the left and the Democrats want, you'll price these companies out of business. So this is a canary in the coal mine moment on so many levels. There are woodside delicatessens all across this country that are having to face the same bleak future. And who will go in there? Jamba Juice or some kind of national chain. Why? Because they get tax breaks, they get deals, they're able to afford the rent. They're able to afford the rent. Why? Why are they able to afford the rent? Because they get tax breaks and deals. Mr. Woodside Delicatessen does not get the same. This is what I was talking about yesterday with Jeff Bezos and Jeff Smith. This is a Jeff Smith. See you later. See you later. And what will happen is ultimately those places, they'll be gone. They'll just be gone. They may be able to exist in a few places, maybe New York City, because of the fact that maybe people own the building, that has been there for decades. New York needs its delis because it's part of their cultural, their historical genetic code, right? New York's got to have the delis. So you may just go to New York just to go to the delis. It'll be like Disneyland. But in other places across America, those businesses are going out of business, and they'll be replaced by automation. They'll be replaced by businesses that are completely, or for the most part, automated. You go up, you'll press a button, you'll do a kiosk thing, and your food will come out, and maybe there's one person there who kind of runs the IT systems and makes sure everything gets distributed, and that's it. That's it. And people will love it. They'll call it progress because they don't have to wait around. They don't have to have small talk with the guy behind the counter who may have a funny accent, right? That'll go away. And a lot of people, they'll be happy with it. They'll just say, just give me my food. I just want my food. Give me my food. And it'll go away. It'll be done. Because for business to survive in that kind of environment, you have to have low overhead. You can't employ people. And people can't even afford to live in Redwood City anyway. When I lived in California and I was a kid, Redwood City was sort of like this sort of in-between place. Like there were nice parts of Redwood City as you sort of went into Atherton and Menlo Park. And then there were like shitholes of Redwood City. And you can't even afford to buy a place in the shithole zip code in Redwood City now. Those are close to $1 million homes. So who's going to live there? And who's going to work there? People are going to get priced out. It's happening here in Fredericksburg. I had a chance encounter with a guy last week. Funny guy. He's an older dude. And we started talking about LSD in about 15 seconds. I don't know how it happened. But we had a good conversation. And he was a math teacher. He taught at the high school here. And they were having a hard time with the mold. So they moved. And they went to the coast thinking it would be better. Wasn't better. So they moved back, and he couldn't even afford to buy his old house back. And he looked at the help wanted at the local high school. They have 4 positions for math teachers. And when he worked at the high school, you couldn't get a job there. So he went in and he talked to the principal, and he said, we can't keep people. People can't afford to live here on a teacher's salary. And that's here in Fredericksburg. It's nice, it's quaint, but they have to bust the help in. People have to, they live in Kerrville or they live in Llano. Sometimes they live in San Antonio and they drive in to work here. This is the problem of where we are in the United It's getting brutal. Places where there's economic growth, people are getting priced out. And so you're stuck with places that don't have economic growth and you're not getting priced out, but what are you going to do? How are you going to make money? It's a big issue. I think those places where people are getting priced out, those are the places where people should go. Like these dying towns. This is not a dying town, by the way. It may be dying in terms of its demographic and people that actually live here and kids. That part is dying, I'll tell you that. This town exists solely. It's got this drip line of tourism. But the dying towns of America are where people should go, theoretically, and reinvigorate them. Pool your money, pool your resources, go in and invest in the dying towns of America. That would be a great project. That would be a great Trump project to take on. Like adopt a small city. Like the federal government should have like a adopt a small city program, and they go in, say we're gonna just throw some stuff at you here. We use some tax breaks. We're not going to give you some HUD money because that's like extortion. But they're not going to do it. Corporations aren't going to do it because corporations have a different model of the world. Corporations are part of what I'm talking about. Where I'm going to go next. All right, so let's get into it. I want to introduce you to another figure who was at one point in time kind of Greta Thunberg 1.0. And her name is Severn Cullis Suzuki. Now, the last name Suzuki might sound familiar to you because that is the last name of David Suzuki, who is the scientist and who had a very popular show on PBS. Severn Cullis Suzuki is his daughter. And in 1992, she made an appearance at, guess where? The Rio Summit. Very important summit. I'll get into why it was important, but I want you to hear her speech. It's about 8 minutes long. Listen to the speech. I'll play about half of it and I'll jump back in. So let me play the speech and let me tell you, or let me ask you where you've heard this speech before. So here we go. Oh. Hold on, I have to do one more thing. My apologies. I have to enable sound. Got to enable that sound. Share computer sound. Here we go. Take two. I'm going to start from the beginning. Severn Cullis Suzuki, Rio Summit. Away we go.
Hello, I'm Severn Suzuki, speaking for ECHO, the Environmental Children's Organization. We're a group of 12 and 13-year-olds trying to make a difference. Vanessa Setti, Morgan Geisler, Michelle Quigg, and me. We've raised all the money to come here ourselves, to come 5,000 miles to tell you adults you must change your ways. Coming up here today, I have no hidden agenda. I am fighting for my future. Losing my future is not like losing an election or a few points on the stock market. I am here to speak for all generations to come. I am here to speak on behalf of the starving children around the world whose cries go unheard. I'm here to speak for the countless animals dying across this planet because they have nowhere left to go. I am afraid to go out in the sun now because of the holes in our ozone. I am afraid to breathe the air because I don't know what chemicals are in it. I used to go fishing in Vancouver, my home, with my dad until just a few years ago we found the fish full of cancers. And now we hear of animals and plants going extinct every day, vanishing forever. In my life, I have dreamt of seeing the great herds of wild animals, jungles and rainforests full of birds and butterflies. But now I wonder if they will even exist for my children to see. Did you have to worry of these things when you were my age? All this is happening before our eyes, and yet we act as if we have all the time we want and all the solutions. I'm only a child, and I don't have all the solutions. But I want you to realize, neither do you. You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up in a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert. If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it. Here, you may be delegates of your government, business people, organizers, reporters, or politicians, but really, your mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles, and all of you are someone's child. I'm only a child, yet I know we are all part of a family, 5 billion strong. In fact, 30 million species strong. And borders and governments will never change that. I'm only a child, yet I know we are all in this together and should act as one single world towards one single goal. In my anger, I am not blind, and in my fear, I am not afraid of telling the world how I feel. In my country, we make so much waste. We buy and throw away, buy and throw away, buy and throw away, and yet northern countries will not share with the needy. Even when we have more than enough, we are afraid to share. We are afraid to let go of some of our wealth. In Canada, we live the privileged life, with plenty of food, water, and shelter. We have watches, bicycles, computers, and television sets. The list could go on for 2 days. 2 days ago, here in Brazil, we were shocked when we spent time with some children living on the streets. This is what one child told us. I wish I was rich. And if I were, I would give all the street children food, clothes, medicines, shelter, and love and affection. If a child on the streets who has nothing is willing to share, why are we who have everything still so greedy? I can't stop thinking that these are children my own age, that it makes a tremendous difference where you are born. That I could be one of those children living in the favelas of Rio. I could be a child starving in Somalia, or a victim of war in the Middle East, or a beggar in India. I am only a child, yet I know if all the money spent on war was spent on finding environmental answers, ending poverty, and finding treaties, what a wonderful place this earth would be. At school, even in kindergarten, you teach us how to behave in the world.
Okay, so you get the gist of it, right? You kind of understand. Like that is Greta Thunberg 1.0, and she's actually very intelligent, and she's 12 years old, and she actually projects as a 16-year-old. And Greta Thunberg is 16, and she projects as like maybe 11 or 12-year-old, or even younger at times. But this is something. Okay, that was a very specific event. That was the Rio Summit of 1992, and that is essentially where Agenda 21 was signed off on by the countries of the world. And so we have been living in an Agenda 21 or post Agenda 21 or post Rio Summit world since that moment in time. And what we're seeing now and have seen is the rollout, the smart cities programs, and not just the smart cities programs, but you have to have an organizing principle in order to have a new society. You have to have something around which people can cohere. So the environment and nature is the new religion. As Christianity begins to be siphoned off into the dustbin of history, and even Islam and Judaism will be at some point taking kind of a tertiary role or backseat role to the new religion, which is the religion of the earth, the religion of environmentalism. And this is the organizing principle and the clarion call for the children of the world and the teens of the world, specifically now, because a lot of them are, Pluto and Sag kids. And Sagittarius does represent, the big, great outdoors, wild nature, large animals. And the Pluto and Sag kids are prime to be organized in a way so that their need for truth and the expression of zeal in their lives has a personal and collective output. Now, on the other hand, you've got kids like Soph and other Pluto and Sag kids who see right through this bullshit, but the media will not give you that version. And instead, what they'll give you is the Children's Crusade version, which is ideological based and drummed up. And Sagittarius, of all the signs, is probably the most ideological. Sagittarius needs systems. Needs systems. Is that right? Even Jasper says Sagittarius needs systems. So that speech, while it was not the speech that codified the Rio Summit and Agenda 21, it certainly added to it. And this has been sort of like a whole, this is in the playbook. This is what they do. When they want to get something passed, they find a kid. And they get a kid to get up there and they get a kid to, give this heartfelt and impassioned speech. I covered, what was her name? Naria, the young gal from Kuwait who went in and testified before this big committee that was run by, what's his name? Tom Lantos. And she went up there and she talked about Kuwaiti babies being tossed up in the air and spiked on bayonets like they were meatballs on toothpicks by Iraqi soldiers, okay? That's what she was saying. And it was a total lie, a total fabrication. She was the daughter of the ambassador of Kuwait. She wasn't just some nobody. It was deeply funded by Kuwait through a major public relations firm. And she sold the war. Just like David Hogg and his little band of merrymakers from Parkland, Florida, they're selling the anti-gun laws. And now they're using Greta Thunberg to sell essentially a new paradigm and a new religion. And they bring the children out, and they know this because that's what children do. They strike a chord inside of us. And we say to ourselves, holy shit, that's promise. That's the future. It works in two directions. It connects with our past and the promise and the potential that we had and the innocence that is still somehow captured to some extent with youth, but it also speaks to the hope and the promise of the future, and that generations on this planet will then succeed us. And so it speaks to us at a very primal level, our past and our future, which is why children tend to be incredibly galvanizing with these events. Now, the environmental movement has the modern environmental movement, and let's be clear about this, which is, and it is a social construct, because nowhere in the environmental movement do they ever talk about things like 5G. They don't talk about 5G. They don't talk about things like geoengineering. They don't talk about things like fluoride and how it impacts our water, our behavior, our pineal glands, basically turning us into zombie automatons. They don't talk about that. They don't talk about genetically modified food. None of this ever comes into this debate about the environment and this holistic relationship we have with vaccines. Are you kidding? They'll champion vaccines because they gave Greta Thunberg her power. Vaccines are good. So what if they fuck you up? You become a superhero. We'll make you better. Just take the jab. Take the jab and you can get up on stage and, have superpowers. I'm still waiting for what the superpowers are. But they never talk about these other things. It's because it's not part of the program. They got the program. Their program is they want to take a bunch of money. They don't want to take the bank's money. No, the banks want to profit off it. They want to take your money. They want to take your money. They want to take the money. They want to tax you 65, 70%. Take that. They want to tax you, and they want to basically implement austerity. And austerity is a big part of the program. Living with less, whether it's less kids, less animals, pets. Forget pets. They're part of the problem. They're part of global warming. No pets. Trust me, the pets are going to come up. It will be considered to be either racist or classist around pets. Pets will be considered to be a luxury at some point. Can't have them. Hear that, Jasper? Austerity is the model. And of course, 90% of the people would have to agree to live with less. Well, 10% or maybe 5%, boy, do they get their run of the resources. So where does this all this come from? Well, it comes from the Fabian socialists. And there's a very interesting book. It's not even a book, it's more of a treatise that I alluded to as we got into today's show. And it is called Changing Images of Man. So let me bring it up here so you guys can actually see what I'm talking about. And I'm going to go through some of this, and I'm going to talk about some of the players that are involved with Changing Images of Man, and some of their background and kind of how this is influencing where we are. Okay, so here we go. This is Changing Images of Man, by the following staff of and consultants to the Center for the Study of Social Policy, SRI International. Here we go. Look who's number one on that list, Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell was essentially employed by this guy, Willis Harman, who is the project supervisor. And they said, Joseph, can you please script out the future? Let's look at the past, because Campbell was a historian. He knew a lot about history, obviously, a mythologist. And so he was employed to look at the past, look at the changing models and the changing images of man through history, historical epic cycles, etc., and then projecting to the future where humanity was headed and how could humanity survive. And not only survive, but even thrive with new principles, new goals, and a new paradigm. Hence, changing images of man. But he's not the only person involved. Another key person here is Dwayne Elgin. I'll get into Dwayne Elgin. Well, why don't I just get into Dwayne Elgin now? Let me see if I can just flip this right here. This is Dwayne Elgin, author, educator, and citizen voice activist. So Dwayne Elgin comes out of this kind of school philosophy of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a priest and who had kind of this early version of this idea of Gaia, and that the earth is this intelligent and sentient force. And people like James Lovelock and Dwayne Elgin, that they were able to kind of forward these ideas around Gaia, and these kind of with very interesting examples in some ways. And some of them are, they're viable. Like when James Lovelock talks about the relationship between, say, plankton and algae, specifically algae in the ocean, and atmospherics, it's fascinating stuff. Lovelock makes this, he basically illustrates how when algae are dwelling in the ocean, and it begins to get too hot, that the algae begin to emit CO2. Algae emits CO2, and then the CO2 rises into the atmosphere and creates a cloud cover. And the cloud cover then cools the surface of the ocean, so the algae don't experience a die-off. And so he looks at these interlocking relationships between plants, animals, and the biogenome, right? This is what he's looking at. And a lot of that stuff is real and valid because we are interrelated. We do have an interrelated relationship with the planet and the species. When the trees go, the oxygen levels fall. You guys know this, just 101 stuff, right? But what they're doing now is they're creating a model that is been radicalized so that theoretically people can get called into action. Anyway, Dwayne Elgin is a guy who is kind of been at the forefront of this stuff for years. One of the books that he wrote was Voluntary Simplicity: Living Meaningful, Satisfying, and Sustainable Lives. So by saying to yourself, well, I'm going to voluntarily indulge in less consumerism, that this is a worthwhile and not only moral but spiritual goal. And that by living with less, and if everybody lives with less, then we can experience sort of more abundance, more plenitude in the planet. I mean, there's some rationality behind this thinking, right? There's some rationality there. But again, in many cases, this is just incredibly selective. Is Al Gore living with less? Is he practicing voluntary simplicity? What about somebody like George Clooney? Oh, I'm sure he would just love to be hanging out with Dwayne Elgin, somewhere at some Rocky Mountain retreat. Do you think George Clooney is practicing simplicity? Voluntary simplicity? Hell no. Somebody who's a radical advocate of the environment, Leonardo DiCaprio, do you think he's practicing voluntary simplicity? No. But this is the media and the mind share that they want to introduce and inculcate people with, because there are people that are seekers. We are a society and a planet of seekers. We seek truth. Theoretically, we seek answers. We seek God in the strangest places. And so when they run across somebody like Dwayne Elgin, or Dwayne Elgin, however you say his name, who has these ideas or these models, it's like, oh, great, let me embrace this. Let me bring this into my, these are some of the precepts of the New Age, and Dwayne Elgin is part of the New Age. He's kind of embedded in this Aquarian conspiracy. that Marilyn Ferguson talked about. The Great Transition. Our mission is to help catalyze personal and social awakening to the critical challenges. It's critical challenges to humanity's future and to foster rational relational consciousness grounded in our connection with the living universe. I mean, look, the stuff on the surface is not bad. It is not a bad thing. But when it is used to create a new organizing principle, when they're not even really addressing the true culprits of some of our greatest ecological challenges, you know that the fix is in. That they're just using the talking points to be able to push their paradigm across the finish line. So let's get into changing images of man a little bit here. Oh, this is a very interesting little passage. This study was administered by the Urban and Social Systems Division of Stanford Research Institute. Harvey L. Dixon, executive director, Willis Harman. Willis Harman was a big player at SRI. He was one of the guys that founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences along with Edgar Mitchell, which I've been to, by the way. I hung out there for a day. And I was part of Dean Radin's experiment on psychic phenomena. Not special, anybody can do it. It's an ongoing experiment in noticing. Anyway, he started IONS. He was a big player at Stanford, and he was a Fabian socialist. And the Fabian socialists are people like Aldous Huxley, H.G. Wells. These are Fabian socialists. And they've got a weird relation with eugenicists and eugenics as well, but that's a different story. However, you can see as part of the acknowledgements, let's get into the acknowledgements. Okay. An advisory panel to the project, which contributed especially helpful formative suggestions and constructive critiques, consisted of René Dubos, Henry Margenot, Margaret Mead, who was a big-time eugenicist, Jeffrey Vickers. Similarly helpful advice was given by Kent Collins, Winston Franklin of the Charles F. Kettering Foundation. Now, somewhere in here is, what's his name? So I can find his name. B.F. Skinner's in this. B.F. Skinner is one of the people that was an editor for Changing Images of Man. Let me see if I can find his name in there. So we got Margaret Mead and B.F. Skinner. We have a behavioralist and eugenicist. And then, of course, Joseph Campbell. All right, so here we go. Here's some of the chapters. Images of man in a changing society, some formative images of man in the universe. So some interesting stuff, right? Like intellectuals, people that are really into consciousness would find this stuff to be fascinating. The knower, the Gnostic view, the individual, Greek views, empire and Christianity, the Roman catalyst, the age of faith and contention, man over things, the new empire, the human as beast, the Darwinian, Freudian, and ethological views. It goes on and on and on. Economic man, servitude, industrial metaphors. The influence of science in the image of man, right? Characteristics of an adequate image of humankind. And here is where we get into a holistic sense of perspective and ecological ethic. Ecological ethic. And then the self-realization ethic. So let's go to page 114, which is the ecological ethic. Because what they're essentially doing is they're essentially making a case and a premise that mankind needs a new centering point, part catastrophe and part religion. Let's go to page 114. Get there real fast. Here, let me do this. This will be easier. Instead of me scrolling through all this. Give me 1 second. Here we go. I just love computers. The ecological ethic. This is a really important piece of this tract. An ecological ethic is necessary if man is to avoid destroying the complex life support system on which our continued existence on the planet depends. It must recognize that available resources, including space, are limited. It must portray the human as an integral part of the natural world. It must reflect the new scarcity in an ethic of fragility, of doing more with less. That's Dwayne Elgin, by the way. That is his writing. Those are his fingerprints. It must involve not only a sense of mutual self-interest between individuals, but also the interests of fellow men and the more extensive interests among fellow creatures, both near and far, present and future. An ecological ethic would imply movement toward a homeostatic yet dynamic economic and ecological system in which the human acts in partnership with nature to harmonize ecological relationships and in establishing satisfactory recycling mechanisms. Such an ethic is necessary to achieve a synergism of heterogeneous individual and organizational micro decisions such that the resultant macro decisions are satisfactory to those who made the component decisions and to society. The alternative way of arriving at satisfactory macro decisions involves behavior controls that would deprive the individual of freedoms, as well as being in conflict with the next characteristic. Let me read that to you again. Such an ethic is necessary to achieve a synergism of heterogeneous individual and organizational micro decisions such that the resultant macro decisions are satisfactory to those who made the component decisions and to society. The alternative way of arriving at satisfactory macro decisions involves behavior controls. There's Skinner. That would deprive the individual of freedoms as well as being in conflict with the next characteristic. An ecological ethic should incorporate concerns that are broader than those of the physical, biological ecosphere. However, it should also lead to concern for the processes of a coordinated and balanced need, satisfaction, and well-being among cultures, cultural ecology, among various institutions and types of activities such as the arts, humanities, science, politics, blah, 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 and among various aspects of the self, infra and trans-psychic ecology. So essentially what they are saying in that the ecological ethic is that the individual must be willing to have less. That is the underpinning of it all. You got to have less. And by having less, and when you have less, you have to, that's a micro decision that has a macro manifestation or macro output or macro effect. And the macro effect is that it would be better for the world. And that the way to go about doing that, if people don't buy into it, is that you have to limit their freedoms. That's what that small chunk was saying, okay? Now, this is all about self-realization and consciousness, which is sort of hand in hand. Not contradictory, but complementary. Both are necessary to synthesize, coordinate mutualistic and hierarchical approaches in a symbiotic manner. The ecological ethic corrects for a selfish distortion of the self-realization ethic. And the latter corrects for an excessively collectivist version of the ecological ethic. So essentially, what they're saying is that if the individual has this idea of self-realization, which is to be determined, that it is a replacement model for the ego. And by having some level of self-realization, that they are then willing to cooperate and become a working part of the new model, which from the outer would be self-imposed, and which is what they're saying here, socialistic. So if you can essentially convert the individual to an internalized socialistic model, you see, this is how it goes. That the self-realization leads to an internalized socialistic model, then the socialistic model does not have to be transposed externally. Do you understand that? I'm going to keep going. Together, the two ethics leave room for cooperation and for wholesome competition. Well, really? For sociality and for individuality. It's a very Aquarian. Dwayne Elgin, or Elgin, born in February. I'm assuming he's an Aquarian. I'm assuming that. I think Campbell's a Taurus, by the way. Anyway. In broad terms, incorporating diverse roles and aspects of existence of the human being, to quote three modern theorists, is by now widely accepted that the history of evolution may be regarded as the development of ever more complex organizations of living matter, molecules, proteins, cells, groups, cells of animals. Yeah, sounds interesting. That's Ralph Metzner, by the way, who was a big acid head. Interesting guy. I think I met Metzner once, living in the Bay Area. All the acid heads lived in the Bay Area. Consciousness, rather than being the product of a particular neural circuit, is the organization, the biosystem that is awareness, is the complementary aspect of that organization in its in psychological equivalent. Its psychological equivalent. Consciousness can be defined as a phenomenon which is synonymous with the structure of an organism. That's interesting. So they use the psychological and consciousness underpinnings by being able to create the psychological and emotional architecture for the new man, or the images of the new man. Here's where Skinner comes into play. The multidimensional, multifaceted, and integrative. We earlier noted how the images of humankind over the past several hundred years have become increasingly fragmented as specialization and reductionism have come to be emphasized in mature industrial societies. This is true. Now, not all of this is propaganda, because a lot of what images of man, or changing images of man, does in actually a really good way is to chart kind of these developments through the various eras. And as a result, sort of the psychological conditions that result of the developments of these eras. You know, prior to the Industrial Revolution, people were freaking out. If you go back and look at what was going on in the 1800s, people saw that the industrial era was upon them, and the machines were going to irrevocably change their lives. Well, they did, some for the better and some for the worse. That's what Brother 10 was all about. Brother 10 sensed that he saw it. He knew what was coming. He was just one figure in a cast of many characters. And we're at another phase now. We're at this next phase where there's a new evolution of machine consciousness and the adaptation of machines and technology. And I think some people are not all that thrilled. And there seems to be some anxiety around where this is headed. Although, of course, Amazon and Target and all these other companies want to sell you that this is the most wonderful thing in the world and your life's going to be just so much easier. But I think it is adding to some of the anxiety and unrest. Let me continue here. If this trend is not reversed, it's likely to lead not only to continuing fragmentation of personality and culture, but also to ideological conflict as social policies based on old images compete for dominance. For example, witness the current debate over the image of the human as portrayed in Skinner's Beyond Freedom and Dignity and operant conditioning in the schools. So essentially what changing images of man comes to is that in order for society and for the human to adapt and evolve, there needs to be a whole new set of principles, a whole new set of guidelines, that the goalposts have to be moved, and that ultimately the organizing principle is nature. Nature and the environment becomes the organizing principles through which the new man or the changing image of man becomes more aligned with this idea of nature as being sort of this dominant force and this organizing principle around which the new consciousness can then resolve and assemble itself. My patience with Jasper's a little thin, I have to say. So when we think about or we look at people like Greta Thunberg, when we look at somebody like Naomi Klein, when we look at somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, these people are not just popping up like mushrooms on a manure pile. There has been a great deal of social inculcation, programming, and blueprinting for this moment in history to occur. And if you get into changing images of man, I highly suggest you find this PDF. It's all over the internet. When I read it, it was like the light went off. It's like, this is it. This is the blueprint. This is the playbook. And they've been playing off of that script because this is going to be the new organizing principle. It will be all about nature. It will all be about resources and carbon taxes. And not only that, but they've improved, or at least they've added onto the model. Now they're talking about things like climate justice. You know, this is a whole new, that like, they didn't talk about climate justice in Changing Images of Man, but I don't think they would be all that disappointed if that was part of the model. Because remember, this is a new philosophy, a new organizing principle. It is the new religion. It is the new religion. And religions, as we know, need prophets. Every religion needs a prophet, right? Mormonism had Joseph Smith. Islam had Muhammad. The self-help movement had Werner Erhard. Every religion needs a prophet. And that is what they've been doing with Greta Thunberg. They have assigned her the role of being the prophetess of the new religion. And that somehow her Asperger's allows her to have this ability to perhaps even tap into the soul of Gaia itself. Now, from an astrological perspective, because I know a lot of you dabble in astrology and follow some of the stuff that I track and chart on a mundane level, we're talking about Uranus and Taurus. And this is a radical reorientation with the Earth. This is what we're talking about. This is the next 7 years are about the Earth Revolution or Earth revolutionaries. That's part of it. Also, Uranus and Taurus, since Taurus is feminine, we're talking about radical women. And what do we have? We've got a young radical woman, Greta Thunberg. We have a lot of other radical women as well, right? Waiting to roll up their sleeves and take up residence in the Oval Office. I think Elizabeth Warren is going to be the player for the Democrats. Now, whether she is the standalone candidate or whether she is going to be on a two-party ticket with her and Hillary Clinton, Don't count out Hillary Clinton, by the way. That remains to be seen. But I'm telling you right now, the next Democratic candidate will likely be Elizabeth Warren or Hillary Clinton. Will be a woman. Maybe we'll have a 2-woman party ticket, or maybe it'll be Warren and Buttigieg, so that they can get, a little trendy rainbow flavor in there. And she actually fits the role of the radical woman because she has a Sun Uranus conjunction in the sign of Cancer. So she fits that Uranus and Taurus model. This is what we're going to be dealing with for the next 7 years. Can you believe it? It's only started. It's only started. So it's about a radical reorientation to the earth. And it's about a radical reorientation to resources. That's where it's happening. That's what's going on. But just because of there's like a high level sort of mundane mission statement or global directive, it doesn't mean that you can't have your own relationship with it. As we got into the fluoride thing, we're in the thick of a battle here in Fredericksburg to stop fluoridating. And the dentists are like, they're mounting their counterattack now. They're getting on the radio. They're gonna put the dentists are they're adamant. Well, we got to have that fluoride. Well, why? Why do we have the fluoride? Why do we have to have the fluoride? It's because of the children. There are poor little children who cannot take care of their teethies. And by putting the fluoride in the water, we're taking care of the children. And then they go into this whole junk science thing. That's a bunch of bullshit. They can launch their junk science up against our supposed junk science, and we can junk science it out all day. At the end of the day, let's just break it down. In this town, and I did the math, there are probably about 10,000 people in this town. I think the quote unquote poverty rate in this town is, or low income rate is 12%. 12%. Let's do the math. So 12% of 10,000 is maybe 1,200 people. Okay, let's just cut that into thirds. Let's just say that you've got half of that. Well, let's say half of it is, well, let's go into the 2/3. You've got a man and a woman. Let's say it's husband and wife, man and woman, right? So that would be what, 600 people roughly. So if it's 1,200, if that's let's see, 12%, so 10,000, so it'd be about 1,200 people, and about a third of 1,200 people is what, 800 people. 800 people. 800 people that would be adults. That leaves 400 potential kids who might be operating at lower middle class or lower class income and below. 400 kids. So let's say, for instance, out of those 400 kids, maybe 300 of them are brushing their teeth and using toothpaste that has fluoride in it. That leaves about 100 kids. So we're going to fluoridate our water in this town for roughly 100 children. Boy, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? And by the way, swallowing fluoride and the topical fluoride theoretic from water, which isn't even sodium fluoride, hasn't even proved to be effective. Has not even proved to be effective. There are medical and dental professionals all over the world that have said it doesn't work. And at the very least, if you're going to have fluoride in your teeth or your mouth, put it, use toothpaste because it's in there, right? It's topical. And by the way, the FDA says 0.7 parts per million. That's like the level for fluoride in the water. Guess what we have here? We've got 0.4 naturally occurring. Do we need the other 0.3 when it's naturally occurring? And at what point, I'd like to know how many people are depressed in Fredericksburg. I bet you it's a lot more than 12%. Are we going to put Xanax in the water? Or are we going to put Paxil in the water because they're depressed? Oh, those poor people, they're depressed. Well, it's probably in the water anyway because of all the drugs that people take and they can't get that stuff out. But anyway. I'm bringing it back to Uranus and Taurus and the changes. You want to get involved, you want to get on the Uranus and Taurus bandwagon, you got plenty of energy, and you got plenty of things that you can do as an individual. These groups, the NGOs, they don't have the, well, maybe they do have the patent on it. Who knows? They have the patents about everything. So it doesn't mean that you can't do your own part. We talked about the starting the community garden, going up against fluoride's the one thing you can go up against right now that you're not going to get shouted out on Facebook. Fluoride's one of those things where it's like low-hanging fruit. It's not like vaccines. There is a battle going on right now with vaccines, and there can only be so many, people who are opposed to, say, vaccines or genetically modified food. Oh, it's great. They can only fight on so many fronts. Right? So if you want to get in on something, you want to make a difference, you're in a small town, get in on the fluoride thing, because you can make a difference, because you have to live in a kind of a smaller place. All of this goes all the way back to people like H.G. Wells and people like Aldous Huxley, the Fabian socialists. This is where it all starts. And everything has just been, it continues to kind of morph and grow out of that kind of original group of people. And then you get into the 60s and you have this kind of flight of consciousness. And that's where people like Dwayne Elgin and the Esalen School and all these Gregory Bateson and all these ideas around consciousness begin to circulate. And then they get to be tied to various social movements. Because of course you've got to have a new religion. And that's where the self-realization part comes into play. That if you can convince people that they're on some kind of enlightenment trip, and that they're willing to give up less in order to feel like, well, by giving up less, I'm gaining more in spirit, giving up less materiality, gaining more in spirit, then they'll sign off on it. And that may be true to some extent. And I'm not saying that that's not true. And that the wanton sort of quest for gross materialism is in and of itself a cul-de-sac. And I believe that. But creating the paradigm and inserting the values is a different story. Because ultimately, it's another form of mind control and just being a part of a new program. And people are so programmed. Holy Christ. I put this post up on Facebook, and it was how Greta Thunberg triggers certain men. It was put out by, I think, an Irish newspaper. And it was like, well, certain men have a real problem with Greta Thunberg. Oh boy, why is that? Maybe we should look at that. And I looked at it and said, all this is it's another form of programming. It's like saying somebody is a racist, or somebody is a sexist, or somebody's a misogynist, or somebody is a fascist, or somebody's a Nazi, or somebody's a homophobe, or somebody's an anti-Semite. Whatever those labels are used to smear, tar, feather, label, and then they're just tracer bullets that cut into the ability to talk about something and have a rational discussion, because it's an ad hominem attack. It's like, oh, you got trouble. You have trouble with Greta Thunberg, or you're being triggered. Bullshit. No, I'm not being triggered. And I know there are women who have problems with Greta Thunberg. Guess what? They're not being triggered either. They're looking at what's going on, and they're seeing a young girl who is being put in a place where she's being manipulated and to some extent even exploited and abused. That would be probably the most kind and humane way to describe what's going on with her. And is she complicit? Is she part of an Illuminati family? Actors who are in on the Globe Theater and the Game of Life? Well, maybe she is. But let's give her the benefit of the doubt. And let's say, hey, she's a 16-year-old girl who's got Asperger's. And she's being pimped out by globalist NGO foundations, people like Naomi Klein, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Soros Foundation, her parents, and she's being exploited. And she's being exploited so that she can convince other kids that this is the most important thing in the world, and that their lives are tied to a dramatic event horizon. And that event horizon is about 8 years out. That's the number that Ocasio-Cortez was using. You think kids are going to get freaked out? Of course they are. Of course they are. And this is, to me, this is a crime against humanity. It's a crime against humanity, because we're not having the big level discussion. What is the genetically modified food doing to our body? Nobody's having that discussion. What are these vaccines doing to our kids? Yeah, they're doing shit to our kids, but it's okay because Greta Thunberg's a superhero now. Why do you think we have all the superheroes? Why do you think they're all mutants? You think it's like a weird kind of just coincidence that one of the most important and money-making franchises in the Marvel universe is the X-Men? They're mutants. They're different than everybody else. And now here you have Greta Thunberg. I have a superpower. I'm a mutant. Look, this is big stuff, people. This is really big stuff. And you're getting a front row view as to how it happens. And if you have any kind of dissent or use any kind of logic, or you try to have any kind of historical perspective, or try to track this back to wherever this stuff has its origins, guess what? You're a crackpot, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're a tinfoil hat wearing angry, hateful person. And why is that? Why is that? Because most people have been conditioned to hold on to something. And they'll say, well, you're holding on to something too. You're a dinosaur. I'm not holding on to anything. Look, my model of the world, I'm not sitting here saying, yeah, we're going to keep it going. We're going to keep pumping the oil. And I've got my oil well over there in West Texas. And I'm going to do just fine. Just keep it coming, keep it pumping. Drill, 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 baby. That's not my world. Okay, I'm not holding on to that. I am not holding on to that. I'm not. But I'm certainly not going to latch on to that lifeboat that they're theoretically offering the rest of us, because that's a ship of fools. It's a ship of fools. Why? Because it's the same people. If you are, let's say you're an ardent capitalist. You're an ardent capitalist. Well, who created capitalism? Who created capitalism? Well, the West, theoretically. You have your people like Hobbes and Locke and Adam Smith, sort of the money minds of modern capitalism, right? But the capitalism was really, 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 really engineered by corporatism, right? Like hardcore capitalism really takes off before the turn of the 20th century. And that's when you have the robber barons and all those Pluto and Aries guys and Pluto and Taurus guys. And they're slicing and dicing and they're creating the 20th century. And that's when capitalism really takes root in a big, big way. Some of it looks very ugly at that time too, by the way. They created that world. Do you think that they're not going to be creating the next world? Or the generations of the people who have generational wealth, foundational wealth, do you think that they're not in the business of creating the next paradigm? Of course they are. Of course they are. It's just another paradigm. It's another paradigm of control. And these people at a global level, when you have the UN involved, and you have these 188 or whatever they are corporations who had this round table that said, we're going to put people before profits, you know what's coming next. You know that there's a big shift in the program coming. There's a really big shift. Is that right? Where do you think it's headed? There's a lot to say today. There's a lot to say. A voice in the wilderness. That's what I am. But you're a voice in the wilderness too. You have many voices. And that's the challenge with our society, our world as it is. Right? We have a lot of voices in the wilderness and we're hundreds and thousands of miles apart. We're not, our voices aren't joined together. And our voices, if we could bring them together, would be a voice probably of dissent. And the dissent is, I do not consent. I do not consent to the fluoride that is being pumped into our water. There's no consent there. I do not consent to it. I do not consent to this model of the world that is being propagandized and sold to us by a 16-year-old girl who's being exploited and quite possibly abused. I don't consent to it. Well, what do you consent to? Let's start with what we don't consent to and work our way back from there. And that's the big challenge. And that's why Trump got elected. Because people were, I mean, other than maybe there was some social engineering going on, people got tired. People are tired of being told what the fuck to do. You can't do this, you can't do that, you gotta eat this, you gotta eat that, meat is bad, vegan is, I mean, people are up to their eyeballs in being told what to do. And there's a bunch of people who would love to tell you what to do, and they've tapped into this kind of collective force that says, guess what? We are the social good, you are not, and we get to tell you what the fuck to do. This is gonna be fun. It's gonna be real fun, right? So I think a lot of people are just saying, I don't consent. I don't consent to this. And then we can work our way back from what we don't consent to ultimately what we do consent to. That's how I think this whole thing should roll out. But in order to do that, you have to have a voice and you have to have a multitude of voices. At least that's what it feels like. And because we've been scattered to the winds, it's very difficult. Very, very difficult. And that's why platforms like YouTube have been really helpful. People have YouTube channels and they have guests and they have shows and they rant and they do this, and people can, you know, YouTube's like the new AM radio. And it's the new talk radio, and people can say, oh man, I love this. This is great, fantastic, superb. You know, there's somebody that has a voice like mine. I can listen to this. I can relate to this. I don't feel alone. That's the one thing that I get more than anything about whatever it is that I do, is that they say, oh, you're able to talk about or articulate things that I think about that I don't have anybody to share with. That's what happens. Those are the most emails that I get, more than anything. And I'm happy to do it. I got a big mouth. I always have a big mouth, unfortunately. I'm your big mouth. Let's see where you guys are in the chat room. I've been talking a lot. Let's see where we are. Chat room, Chatlandia. I say Chatlandia. Where are you? I must find you. I must reconnect to Chatlandia. Hold on. Here you go somewhere. Here we go. Jasper has been, he's been antsy. Usually just parks himself. Where are we? Here we go. I found you, Chatlandia. I'm back. I am back. It is the independent individual, the free radical, that must bend the structure with it. Freedom is more powerful. The more people logically counter, the authority will win eventually. I would agree with that, Brother Z. Things will change no matter what. Sometimes we have to tighten our belts. What else? Whoever created the Greta bot is reprehensible. Jadil says, whenever I think, write, speak about Greta, I'm always referring to the people behind her. She's just a mouthpiece. Jadil, I do not consent. Glyphosate, there we go. Thank you. That's another issue nobody ever talks about. It's glyphosate. Glyphosate, absolutely, 100%. You think the ecological army, the Green Ecological Army, ever talks about glyphosate? No, not at all. You should try to get Corey Morningstar on for an interview. Okay, I think I might have his book. There are media and infrastructure campaigns they use to grow cities. They bring them here with Portlandia, then control the new residents with new infrastructure. You're right, Brother Z. Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, Sticky, nice to see you. Nice to see you. What impact do I expect the Christmas eclipse to have overall? Well, Lynn, you decided to check out. They have no respect for my lack of consent. Lynn, you did not consent to the Northern Hemisphere. That was your lack of consent. You said I don't consent. And that's fine. You got out. That's an option. So the eclipse. I think it's a heavy eclipse. I think it's a really heavy eclipse, to be honest with you, because there are a couple things going on with that eclipse. Number one, it's happening. It starts on Christmas night on the 25th and then goes into the 26th. So you're dealing with some pretty heavy duty energies. You're dealing with obviously solstice energies, 22nd, 23rd. You're dealing with the theoretical Christmas energy, which isn't really. Last night I was watching the football game down at this place called Cultures on Main Street. It's a really good football game, by the way. It was totally great. Unfortunately, some guys got really hurt, which is not great. But I was talking with this young guy who's sitting next to me, 24 years old. It's always interesting talking to young people. So we got into the political thing. And this kid's he's a golf pro. That's what he does for a living. He works at a golf course and he plays golf with people with money, teaches lessons, stuff like that. Interesting gig. So we got around to astrology. What do you do? I'm an astrologer. And every time I say that, in most parts of Texas, they think I got a big telescope and I go work at UT. And then I had to explain it. And I said, when's your birthday? And they said, I was born on 9/11. I'm like, oh, really? I said, did you know that that's Jesus' birthday? He's like, I said, yeah. That was when Jesus was. Look it up. Look it up. There are a number of biblical scholars, like real biblical scholars, people that, get out of the Christmas myth. Like to say that Jesus was born on 9/11, that's almost a blasphemy. And that's coming from biblical scholars, people that, take what they do fairly seriously. And that 12, 24, 25, that's not it. That is not it, right? It's not it. That is actually the birthday of Nimrod, which I've covered before. So when Christmas comes around, we're celebrating Nimrod. But theoretically, we're celebrating Jesus. That's really not the case. So he had a really interesting kind of reaction to that. Then we talked about 9/11. I told him a bunch of shit about 9/11. He's going, wow. I'm dangerous. I was even more dangerous when I drank. Now I'm mildly dangerous. I just drink Topo Chico. That's it. But I'm a lot more clear and lucid. Anyway. So we were talking about that. And we were talking about Christmas. And so the Christmas energy is there on the eclipse. Also, you have to understand that that's connected, to Nimrod. And Nimrod was probably, descendant of Nephilim, created this enormous tower. Why did he create such a big tower? Well, he probably created a big tower because he was probably a giant. Nimrod was probably one of the giants. And so the tower allowed him to have a livable living structure. That's just kind of an intuition that I have. It wasn't like it was a tower that was made for a bunch of people that were like, 5'9". I think it was a tower because he actually was able to hang out in the tower. So here we have king of Babylon, probably either direct Nephilim or descendant of Nephilim. And the 25th is really the day that signals his return which is actually his son, brother, known as Cush. So the eclipse is happening right around that time. Now remember, the eclipse is a black sun. That's what the eclipse is. It is a black sun. So we have a black sun happening during the first degrees of Capricorn, which is Saturn, which has also been known as the black sun. And it is the domain of the L, or the elite. That is Saturn's domain, right? At one point, people thought that Saturn was actually a black sun. Now it's changed, different. It's got the rings and all that stuff. So we're dealing with a couple of different things. We're dealing with an eclipse, which is a black sun, on top of the first degrees of Capricorn, Saturn, which is an echo of the black sun, on the 25th, which is the resurrection of Nimrod through his son brother Cush, with the fake or false or artificial celebration of the birth of Christ. Now put all that into a cauldron and cook it, just from that perspective. Now, eclipse energy in its intensity is roughly about 2.5 weeks before and about 2.5 weeks after, okay? 2.5 weeks after that eclipse, we're into the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So that Saturn-Pluto conjunction is piggybacking on that eclipse energy. How can it not be heavy? Whatever happens during the eclipse on the right on the 25th, just after the winter solstice, I believe we'll see the effects of that eclipse right around the summer solstice. Like it finally gets played out to its end with the backside of it on the summer solstice. And again, it's in that 6.5 month kind of time frame and zone. So in terms of a predictive model, I mean, obviously we're going through some weird stuff with the money right now. I talked about the repo market, and it's just getting really flim-flammy. There's a lot of information coming out of China that China's economy, again, also, China's economy are like those buildings they built. It looks good on the surface, but within 3 years, they're chipping, cracking, and falling apart. So that's a metaphor for what's going on with China. So I think we could potentially be in for something pretty significant financially. Will they take the thing off the rails at that time? Probably not, but it could be pretty serious on a financial level. I also think Trump's going to have some trouble because that eclipse is happening. He's got Saturn at around 25, Cancer. So that eclipse is really some of those planets like the Saturn opposition, Pluto opposition, that's taking place in his 5th house, opposing a lot of his Cancerian planets. So I think that period is going to be sort of like Armageddon for Trump. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean he's going to go away or that's going to be his demise, but that's when the forces are finally aligned to oppose one another in sort of the great conflagration. And you can see it's happening right now. And I think that eclipse period sort of begins that process. And when we get into the conjunction, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, it's kind of a big deal. And that's sort of the next phase. So, it's a very heavy period. At least that's what I'm inferring from that energy. It's a very heavy period. But again, if you really understand where we are in the 4th turning, and we are in the winter of America right now. And this is the time and the stage before there is a rebirth. And when that rebirth occurs, well, my best guess and best estimation for that would be around 2028. So we've got a good 9 years of going through whatever we're going through before I think we hit new ground. And that, to me, 9 years is actually a very optimistic number, because we're going to have more deconstruction take place before that happens. So, you know, it's always, well, what do you do? What do we do? What do we do? Well, you can't live in fear. That's because fear is just the mind killer. I had a client today, great client, and we were talking about a number of different things. And it's kind of like, if you're not satisfied with your job, or you're not satisfied with where you live, and some people aren't, and that's a valid kind of like reality. But you can't live with that reality, because you're not satisfied with your job, you're not satisfied with where you live, you're not going to be happy. You're going to want another job, or you're going to create some form of destabilization, or you're going to kind of program your own demise. Or I'll give you an example. One time, long time ago, not in recent memory, I was hanging out at an A's game, and I was with some friends. I guess they were friends. And let's just say I was altered, and I was not having a very good time at the game. I was bored. I like baseball games. I was bored. I was tired. And I just wanted to leave, but I didn't drive, so I couldn't couldn't leave. So I'm hanging around, and I'm hanging around. I'm kind of by the exit. And all of a sudden, the security guard looks at me and asks me, "Where's your ticket? Where's your ticket?" I couldn't find my ticket. Because you're out of here. You're out of here. So later that night, I was rummaging around my pants, and guess what? I had my ticket. But in that moment, I couldn't find my ticket. You see, that's how reality works. I was in a heightened state of reality, amplification, didn't want to be there, and Mr. Security Guard said, "You're out of here." He was just aligning with my reality and just carrying out my wishes. So given that, if you're living in a place where you don't like the place you live, or you're having a hard time with your work, you can't live with that reality. Just like right now, if you are looking around and saying, you know, this is a shit show, life sucks, you know, we got Pippi Longstocking on Asperger's telling me that I'm worthless, terrible, and I've got to just give everything away and go live in a cave so that we can make the future better, right? I mean, if you let that reality get into you, it's going to be very hard to live in the reality. I mean, that's why there are a large number of men my age who have committed suicide, because there's nothing to live for. They look around and they say, well, what's to live for? Because all these things that I invested in, the world, the culture, the sports, it's all going away. And if I want to have a car and I want to have a combustion engine and get my jollies off, some, you know, pigtailed little Pippi Longstocking is going to tell me it's not good for the environment. Are you kidding me? It's one of the few things that I have left in my life that gives me any kind of joy. And you're going to tell me that I can't have that. Who wants to live in that world? And do you think that that's not intentional? Of course it is. Of course it is. It gets into demoralization. So you have to find things in your life that are wins. And you cannot diminish the wins. And this is what I was sharing with my client. Case in point. She went out to a baseball game on a date. This is somebody who's, you know, in my zip code age-wise, right? And not a lot of dating happening. She goes out, baseball game, springtime, has a date, has a very nice time. And then, of course, he's going to call again. He's going to call, you know. And he did send a text and said he had a nice time and everything. He was being a gentleman, but it didn't evolve to anything after that, you know. And I'm like, well, why should the experience after that diminish the win? The win was the moment. It was the game. It was being there with people. It wasn't dirty or bloody or violent or disgusting. I think maybe the team even won. there were baseball snacks, it was company, it was springtime. That's the win. That's the win. And then what we do is we diminish our wins. And we live in a time where we can't do that because our wins are really important. They're really, really important. And so when you have an experience that's wonderful, or even, really gratifying in a mundane way, like, grab that thing. That was great. Like last night, I went down to this place. I had a couple of Topo Chicos. I talked to this kid. We watched football. That's a win. That's a total win for me. It's like, and I had to go back into my life, and I've got some issues and challenges in my life, just like everybody else does, but I'm going to have that moment. So don't diminish your wins. It's really important. Really, really, really important. And if you're unsatisfied with where you are and what you're doing, then you need to take a step back and you need to find a way to re-engineer your life so that at some level it is more gratifying. I had, case in point, I had a client yesterday, great person, wonderful person. And like, living in LA, I've had it. I can't live in LA anymore. Well, let's see where you can live, right? So I did a reading for her. We looked at relocation, astrocartography. I found a place where, believe it or not, both her and her husband could actually resonate astrologically with. That's re-engineering your life. Sometimes you got to move out of your situation. And it's a real balancing act between being able to live in a place or being able to have a job and then move into something else. It takes some planning and it takes some intention, but it can be done. What you don't want to fall prey to, and some people will do this, by the way, is they will fall prey to something. It will just be, the conditions will be so terrible that they have to change them. And then it becomes drastic. And that's when change gets really difficult and transitions get really hard. So everybody has something right now, it feels like, and you have to be smart. You have to make good choices. You have to be around good people. That's another thing. If you're around people that suck, or you're around people that bring you down, you've got to put them on waivers. And if you have to be alone for a while, then that's the way it goes, because you can't have those people in your life. We all need people that can support us, not hold our hands. Support is, when you're fucking up, they tell you that you're fucking up, or they tell you that, you really ought to think about stopping this behavior or stopping this kind of ritualized thing that you do, whatever, and then support you when you do something. These are the people that we need. That they're willing to speak truth to you, but not tear you down. And if you have those people in your life, hold on to those people. Those are people that you can have on your team, and everybody needs a team. But if you have to go it alone for a while, that's just the way it is. Because if there are people in your life that are toxic and they're holding you down, everybody's got their own version of it too. Like, you may be a dyed-in-the-wool, new Green Deal person. You may think all these conservatives or alt-right people are really, really toxic and you got to get rid of them. Well, maybe that's true. You'll just surround yourself with other people who are sycophantic. That's another potentiality. But true friendship and true support is somebody who can tell you the truth and tell you that you're fucking up, or you're not doing the right thing, or you may want to rethink this. Not just somebody who just goes along with the program and says, yeah, fuck them and fuck that. That is not true support. That is not true friendship. And those are the people, if you have them, hold on to them. They're like gold. So these are the things that you can do to kind of get through this time and, survive, take care of your body the best you can. Have good influences in your life. Again, I look around, I have a lot of people in my sphere, and some of them I will never meet, but I will talk to them. I will do readings with them. Some people I have up close and personal relationships with. And I know one person who's going through a very difficult time, and they've cut a bunch of cords, and all they're doing right now is reading books that are fulfilling for them. They're reading the Bible. They're reading Aristotle. You know, they're getting into frequency hertz meditations at night, right? Because they've realized that their cords to the outer world are corrupted and deficient, and they just cut them off. But instead of going into a shell, or instead of going into some kind of dependent behavior or toxic behavior, they went inside and are rewiring. And that's always a possibility. Always a possibility. There's always a move you can make. Always a move. They talk about this at MMA, by the way. If you're in a hold or some kind of a hold, that at the right moment in time, if you do the right thing, you can get out just about anything in MMA. They teach that, by the way. Just remember that. There's always a counter move in your life that can help you get out of a situation that can be very, very sticky. Okay? All right, where am I here? What do we got? Let's see. Oh, Coniferous Sources. Hello, everyone. I'm terribly sorry, Robert, for asking you about guns in the comments section. It was an inconsiderate inquiry. Have a nice day, everybody. Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah, that was a weird question, you know. That was like, so Robert, do you own a gun? And I had to sit there and think about, well, how am I going to respond to this? I'll give you kind of an insight into how I think based on that question. So the first thing is in my mind is, why the fuck are you asking me this question? Like, you come in here to my show, right? You post a lot and you're in the chat room. And I'm like, okay, well, you're kind of one of the gang, right? Why are you asking this question? So then my next thought is, can I trust this person? I don't even know this person, right? Can I trust this person? And I'm like, and should my reply be based on, why the fuck did you ask that question? And can I trust you? So I had to sift through that. I'm like, probably not the best way to reply. And the best reply was what I thought was what I put on there. And again, in case you missed it, I don't own a firearm, but I do support the Second Amendment. I would support it with my life. I guess that would be my air gun. I own an air gun. That just scared Jasper. I just found the Jasper repellent. Sorry, man. Don't report me to PETA. Take that. Anyway. But no, it's all good. It's all good. You didn't have to apologize. I didn't expect you to apologize. We all have interesting moments of interaction. Let's put it that way. Right. Anything else? Let's see. Are you in US? Me? Somebody else. Let's see. Oh, I think you're talking about Kestrel. Yeah. The politics of demoralization. Oh, a lot of my reason for being here is to flirt with some of Robert Fink's groupie chicks as someone endowed with celestial interactions. That's far from the only. That's good. That's good. At least we're honest here, right? It's good. I have a can of wasp spray that goes 10 feet, no gun. Hang on to that. All right, I'm out of here. Thanks, everybody. Check out Changing Images of Man. It's available on the internet. It's a very interesting read. If you have any interest in Joseph Campbell, Stanford Research Institute, SRI, Esalen, Consciousness, Dwayne Elgin, Voluntary Simplicity, Gaia, The New Green Deal, The New Green Age, all that stuff. Go check it out. It's there. It's all in there. It's all in there. I'll be back on Sunday night with Sunday Night Astro Live. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. Have yourself a great Friday and a great weekend. I'm Robert Phoenix, and I am out of here.